Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. And what I want to do here in this video is how to do object-oriented programming in Go using closures. So in the previous video, we used like structs and interfaces and methods in Go using like receiver arguments and all this stuff. But I'm going to show you another way where you can kind of pretty much get the same result using closures. And it gives you a little bit more flexibility to make sure that the result works the way you want it to work. Because you can inherently make things private and public because of closures. And if you're not familiar with what closures are, it's essentially the idea is you're taking advantage that certain data is scoped within another function. So for example, what we're going to do is we're going to create a mailman. Okay, save. So the first step in this, because it's Go, to do this, you're going to want to create a struct first, because you always want to. So I'm going to create a struct. Actually, it's type mailman struct. So it's a type of struct, and we're going to give it two functions. We're going to say total mail, which is a function, and then this function is not going to return anything. So you do have to, so if it did return something or did take parameters, you'd have to specify that. So it'd be like, oh, it takes an integer as a parameter and returns an integer. You'd have to specify that in the struct. But since this returns nothing and takes no parameters, I'm just going to do that. And then I'm going to deliver mail. Okay. And basically this mailman thing is only defined by these two functions. Okay, cool. But those functions don't exist yet. I've never actually defined what these functions for this mailman will be. So, oh, Google Home. So the next step is I'm going to create a function called create mailman. Okay, we're going to create mailman, and basically we're going to have two parameters. The name of the mailman, which is going to be a string, and the name of the mailman, which is going to be a string, and the letters, which is going to be an integer. Okay, this is not going to, it's going to return a mailman. Okay, so this is going to return a mailman. So there we go. So we have a create mailman, which is a function that takes a string and an integer and returns a mailman. Okay. Now notice I didn't define any properties in the mailman struct, so I didn't actually put name and letters in there. And the benefit of doing it this way by using closures, because I could put the name and letters property in there, but then they are accessible in ways that I may not want them. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to define the properties in the function. The properties will only exist within the function. And then I'm going to use these functions within this create mailman function, and I'm going to use these functions to access those properties. So that way they can only be accessed the way I want them to. And basically you won't be able to just call them using dot notation or anything like that. Only like any getter, setter functions and functions that I include and deliver will allow you to interact with that data. So, okay, so first we're going to just do that, the name equals name. Okay, and then we're going to say letters, remaining, or just say the mail equals letters. Okay, and I think I'm going to want to, since these are new variables, I'm going to want to do that. Okay. Cool. So I've declared those variables, and now I'm going to declare some functions. Actually, I'm going to just return the mailman. So I'm going to return a mailman, and then I have to define the mailman's functions. So the first property of mailman is total mail. So I need to define a function that will be that. So func, no parameters, and all this is going to do is print the mail. So the mail. And notice I did that right here. I renamed the print line function print. Okay, so just so you understand how I'm able to just do that without doing that whole fmt dot print line thing. Okay, then I am going to, so that ends that function. So that's the first property. The second property is another function, which is the deliver mail property. Okay, so func, and what that's going to do, it's going to decrement the mail. So we'll say the mail okay. And actually I want to print I want to print the name too. So I'm going to put the name there, so that way you can see that the name's there as well. The properties are accessible. And then the mail will be decremented. And that's all that function does. And then that should do it for that. So essentially when I run this function, it's going to return me a mailman struct with these two functions, but these functions are referencing the properties that are in the function. And since these functions were declared within this function, they have access to this scope. Even though this function may have finished its job, it returned the mailman, these values will still exist because of where these were created. And that's sort of the whole closure concept. By creating a function in a function, you can access the parent function's values even outside of the function, which is neat. Cool. So now let's actually test it out. So let's create a new mailman. So we'll say Mr. Jones equals the results of create mailman. We have to give him a name, so Mr. Jones, and he's gonna start off with 500 letters. Okay, and then what are the two functions again? Total mail and deliver mail. So let's see how much mail he still has. So it'd be Mr. Jones dot total mail. We invoke the function, so that'll print the stats, and then we'll say Mr. Jones dot deliver mail. What was it? Yeah, deliver mail. Invoke the function, so he delivers a letter. So then after that, he should have less mail. Mr. Jones dot total mail again. Save. Let me run this so far. Command line arguments, unexpected new line. That's on line 22. Let's just okay, so this matches up with that. That's fine. This matches up with that. That's fine. Now, why is it complaining about a new line there? Save. I mean, was it wanting a comma after the function? I will give it the comma after the function if that's what it wants. So let's see here. Save. I don't think that will fix it, but... Or it did. Okay. Okay. So in that case, see, as you see here, Mr. Jones starts off with 500. He delivers a letter, and now he's 499. So he's still able to access to those two variables, even though he is no longer in. Again, that original create mailman function has been terminated. Okay, and I'm still able to access these two variables that only existed, that should only be scoped inside that function. And if I were to create a separate mailman, so if I were to create Miss Stevens, who's another mail person, and we're gonna create a mailman. Miss Stevens. She has 600 letters. Okay. And then I were to then show you Mr. Jones' total mail and Miss Steve total mail. We should have two different results because they're referring to two different closures. Each instance of that function, create mailman, creates a new closure, a new instance of that function running that kind of whose scope persists. So if I run the code, cool, and there's Miss Stevens with 600 letters. So it's like creating an object without having to necessarily have classes in Go. But here I'm able to sort of bundle methods, functions, and properties. And on top of it, I've made these properties private because these properties are only accessible by the functions I defined. So essentially, I've created essentially a class and a constructor function for that class that has private properties. And it works. Now, if I wanted a property to be public, then I would just include it in the mailman struct. Okay, and that's kind of a neat pattern. Because otherwise, I'm not sure if there is a way to create private properties. There probably is a better way to do that, but this does the job. Okay, by using closures, you can create private properties and create this object type thing, and that works pretty much like an object in Go. Very neat, and you don't necessarily have to worry about interfaces or creating separate methods with receiver arguments. You can just do it this way. So that is neat. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.